That's her whole point, that America's got to get back in the solutions business. And that if we do, we're going to do fine. Now, why should she be the person to lead that? Number one, because all her life, that's the business she's been in. Let me just tell you some things that aren't widely known. When we met in law school, it was relatively rare for a woman to be a law student back in the dark ages. Now over half of the law students are. But one thing that hasn't changed is most people after the first year cannot wait to get out of law school. They've been going to school a long time. Like half of them or more have student debt. They just want to get out, pay off their debts, and get on with their lives. She broke the mold. She took a fourth year, an extra year, to work at the hospital associated with our university on the problems of severely abused and neglected children. Because believe it or not, more than 3 decades ago, nearly no states had protections for these kids. She would come home night after night after night and say, Bill, I keep seeing these kids in the hospital with cigarette burns in their arm that hadn't been fed in a week, severely emaciated, and the laws didn't protect them because people were so reluctant to interfere in family disciplinary decisions. So she took another year and worked with other people. They came up with all these recommended standards. Now they've been adopted in virtually every state in the country. There's no state now where you can get away with abusing a kid like that. She was making changes in other people's lives as a student. And then when we got out of law school, most people would have taken the lure of big, prestigious jobs with good incomes, especially if you had to work your way through school and had debt, as she did. Not her. She took a low-paying job with the Children's Defense Fund. And her first big job as a lawyer was knocking on the doors of poor people's houses in New Bedford, Massachusetts. One of the reasons she won Massachusetts, I might add. Big. When all the political establishment was against her because they knew her. So she's knocking on the doors of poor people's houses, asking why their children are dropping out of school. And what she and her young colleagues found was that most of these kids were dropping out of school because they had mental or physical disabilities, usually quite minor ones. But the schools were totally disorganized then to deal with that. You had kids that may have a minor case of dyslexia, and there were no teachers trained for them. So the work these kids did that the Children's Defense Fund sent to Congress was the basis of the landmark Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which requires now in America an equal and appropriate public education for all of our kids without regard to disability. That was a huge change that she was making even as a young woman. So then, when she came to Arkansas and married me and I became governor, she wound up, for example, when she first came, organizing the first legal aid clinic for poor people that our part of the state had ever had. President Carter appointed her to the Legal Services Corporation board. By the time she was 30, she was chairman of the board. Just because she was making changes for other people. She never run for anything. She headed our education reform efforts. This should be relevant to you in the presidential effort. Because when she started, an expert said that we had the worst schools in the country. And when she finished, the same guy said that we had improved our schools more than any state in the country except one other. That's what you want in a president, someone who can make positive changes in other people's lives.